In Colorado, my family has a little vacation house. The house has been in the family since before I was born, so it's obviously showing its age in many ways, but it's also around 40 years old, so it won't seem brand new. My parents are avid skiers, which was the driving force behind that purchase. The home is still in our family today, but it's truly on its way out. My dad has had to perform a lot of maintenance on it over the years, and at this point he thinks about demolishing it and building a new location, but I don't really get engaged in his choice. The great thing about going up there when we were kids was the sheer amount of space. The property has a huge opening with woods surrounding it all directions, and there is a dead-end road that goes downhill, which leads to a few more nearly equally big properties. This story takes place about 15 years ago, when I was 8 and my brother was 11. We were up in Colorado during a blizzard. The snowfall was insane, and of course my brother and I had to go out and play in it. It's the ideal setup for hide and seek, snowball fights, or any other kind of game. For example, my brother Josh and I went outside in our snow gear to play our own little set of rules for the Snow Fight Me. Basically, we would set up two forts and then create a giant snow wall as the so-called jewel, which we would have to successfully steal from the other base and bring back to ours. Josh decided to set up his base on the closest neighboring property because there was almost never a car there, so we would frequently play games on their property as well. In this game, we could either cut through the woods to get to each other's bases, or take the road up or down to get to the opposite fort. After Josh ran down the road and vanished, I was supposed to wait for him to blow the whistle to signal the start of the game. I waited for a long time, more than 5 minutes, but he had already set up his fort by then, so all he had to do was return down there and blow the whistle when it struck, perhaps the 10-minute mark. Mark is when I realized that I probably couldn't hear the whistle from there, so I began planning my route. Should I walk down the road or through the woods? I chose the road because, to be honest, it was frightening to think of traveling through the woods during a snowstorm when I was 8 years old. Though I wasn't cold at all, I began to plod through the unplowed snow on the ground as flakes of snow blew into my face from the numerous layers my mom made me wear. As I got closer to the driveway to the neighboring property, I looked through the trees and couldn't see Josh because it was so easy to see through the woods in the winter. I then cut into the property through the trees to sort of sneak in, but Josh was nowhere to be seen. When I saw his fort, I looked around to make sure he wasn't there, but before I could get the jewel, I heard a woman's voice saying, "Excuse me, are you looking for your brother?" I turned to see that it was an older woman at the neighbor's house. I called back that we were playing a game, and she said, "Your brother isn't here." I was very confused, so I started walking towards the front steps of the house, and as I got closer, I noticed that someone was staring out at me from one of the upstairs windows. For a moment, I thought it was Josh, but the woman's face was covered, presumably by a black beanie, and the bottom part of their face was covered under the bottom of the window. I also noticed a trail of footprints leading to the front entrance. The woman was smiling oddly at me, so I knew these were Josh's. I recall feeling like my heart was sinking when she waved me inside to come in and get out of the cold. I stopped dead in my tracks and screamed, "Josh!" But there was no response and the woman stopped smiling. She didn't expect me to do that. I also noticed that the other trail of footprints was doubled over. If it was Josh, his footprints turned around and headed back towards the woods. Then I heard powerful footsteps coming down from inside the house, and if it was him, his footprints turned around and headed back towards the woods. I started to run, and the woman screamed an aspect at me or someone else that I couldn't understand. I glanced back at the house once, and that face that was upstairs at the window was no longer there, and as I ran off the property back on the road, I began to hear my dad whistling from up the hill. He would whistle to fetch my brother and me home for dinner, and when I returned to our driveway, my dad and Josh were already there, having previously been on their way to pick me up. I could even attempt to describe what had happened. Josh had previously informed me that there were people at the neighbor's house urging him to come inside. I replied that I had experienced the same thing, so my dad walked down there brandishing a weapon as our mom and I waited inside the house. After a while, he returned and said that the front door was locked and nobody was answering. So we went to another neighbor's house, and they knew the owners and called them. This part still gives me the chills. My dad told me that the owners of that house were not there that weekend, and that no one was supposed to be there. The police were called, and my brother and I had to speak to one of the officers on the scene to describe the woman. According to my dad, the back door was unlocked and the house was investigated, but nothing was found. As a result, my parents were afraid of a break-in and took home any extra valuables. Because of the eerie nature of that recollection alone, we avoided playing on that land after that day, thank God. We didn't go inside the home. I've been skiing for as long as I can remember, and my parents actually met skiing competitively. Therefore, they felt that it was crucial that my brothers and I study as early as possible. Fast forward to around 20 years ago, and that is my current age. Everyone knows that Vermont offers the greatest skiing in the Northeast, so this tale occurred to me a few winters ago when I was 21 years old and a senior in college. It was going to be a vacation like any other, but it was me. It was the second day after skiing, and the day before we had a fairly good grasp on the trails, so this day would mostly be about pushing and testing ourselves. I can't remember for the life of me what mountain we were skiing that trip, because Jaden had booked it, and Ryland was driving. However, I do remember that it was huge, with like 7 ski lifts covering all the different peaks. If I had to guess, it was Killington, and we skied for almost 2 full days, and I'm sure there were still trails in place. The boundaries in accordance with tradition, I would also be lying if I claimed that we didn't have a few fireball shooters to spice things up. The journey was really fun. The double blacks never became monotonous, and racing down each hill was a unique game in and of itself. We were all tired, but we knew that as soon as we got on the road to go home, we would immediately miss the mountain again. We were thinking about how we would conclude the trip when 2 girls without helmets approached us at the top of the lift. We had maybe an hour left before the lifts closed. Now, some may find this a little strange, but I wouldn't be writing the narrative. Fairness, if omitted this detail, the 2 girls, a brunette and a blonde, were dropped off at Gorgeous. I don't say that in any weird way. They were just, objectively, 2 of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen in person. They introduced themselves as Taylor and Devon, and we struck up a conversation. They essentially told us that they were bored because the mountain was packed with older people, which I had actually mentioned to my friends the day before, so it made sense why they approached us. A group of young people who appeared to be about their age. Devon seemed like a really seasoned skier, as she kept asking Air all these technical questions about his ski. He and Ryland actually own their own pricey skis, rather than renting like Jaden and I always did, which the girls seemed to admire. The 4 of us accepted the challenge and cheerfully swigged some of their bottle, after Taylor made a remark about our shooters. We told them in jest that the alcohol unlocked our true ski potential or something stupid like that, which they found funny. I could tell that this sent Ryland a little over the edge because he usually drinks more than he can handle, so this wasn't too surprising. I made a note not to drink too much because something about this whole situation just rubs me the wrong way. Even though Amir was being his typical overly flirtatious self, and Taylor seemed interested in it, I didn't really mind because I thought we were going to spend the rest of our time on the slope with these 2 girls. After the slopes closed, Devon asked if we had skied down a trail called Devil's Forest, which I definitely didn't recognize. Our other friend Chase would have had the trail map memorized because he's literally a walking GPS, but he wasn't with us, so we told them we hadn't. And they clarified that it was a glade trail that's a little obscure and rarely open for those who don't know. Glades are essentially trails that run between trees, giving you the impression that you are skiing through a forest. We really enjoyed skiing the glades more than anything else, so this Devil's Forest trail piqued our interest. We told them we were game, and they motioned for us to follow them. We came to a choke point on our skis, and they told us to take them off because we had to walk a little uphill for a short while. I could tell we were in a relatively desolate area of the mountain because the snow was perfectly fresh, and there was no one around. Despite this, I thought nothing of it, because I was curious and inebriated. We clipped our skis off and followed the girls up the mountain air, with Ryland running ahead, presumably to flirt with them further, and Jaden and I hanging back a little to give them some space. As we followed, I could tell Jaden looked a little wary, so I asked him what was on his mind. I prefer to think of ourselves as the group's sensible, level-headed individuals, since the others were too impetuous and erratic, and Ryder would follow a lady if she let him fall from a cliff. I agreed with Jaden that it was strange that this alleged path would not be accessible by ski lift, since I had never had to hike uphill to get to a trail. Prior to our agreement to just monitor events closely, we discussed what two ladies could do against a group of 4 large men, regardless of how they looked. Jaden Den and I came up with a group as we entered the forest. Ground finally began leveling off, and it appeared like Ryland and Amir had both made significant progress. With his arm wrapped around Devon, who was grinning and giggling, Ryland pointed in the same direction that we had been going, which had suddenly turned into a downhill slope. Knowing that this was another situation where we could have benefited from Chase's assistance, I sighed. He would have known exactly where we were and where this trail would have led. Jaden remained doubtful, so he asked the girls if they were certain that this was a real trait rail. Aid that they were, and that it would also take us straight back to the lifts. Before I could say anything more, Devon took the bottle out once more and told us that we had to finish it. Mir and Ryland happily took some hefty gas, but when the bottle reached Jaden, he declared he was intoxicated. As soon as he said that, I could have sworn for a brief, while Devon's grin turned into a furious frown, but she quickly returned to her previous smile as I blinked. When I looked around at my friends, their expressions were all normal, so I must have been the only one who noticed. She put on a seductive smile and batted her eyes at Jaden, asking him politely. He reluctantly took the bottle, if only to silence her. By the time it reached me, I put the bottle to my mouth, but I didn't actually drink anything. Everything about this encounter was a trickling alarm. Bells rang in my brain as I gave Devon the bottle back and it away. I saw that neither girl had consumed any alcohol this time, and I realized that I hadn't witnessed any of them do so at all. I checked my phone 30 minutes before the elevators closed. I tried to justify why we couldn't ski this trail by claiming that we wouldn't have enough time to return up and down the mountain to where we had parked. However, the girls insisted that we would have enough time and that the lifts were connected at the bottom anyhow, so they abruptly told us that we were wasting our time and told us to follow them if we could. At the bottom, Jaden and I obviously didn't want to, but we figured we had no choice but to follow, so I let Jaden lead the way because, after all, this was still a difficult-looking slope, and sloping in the forest is no joke. I'm not sure what I was anticipating, but when we reached the bottom, I was relieved that all 4 of them were there, laughing and flirting as before. Jada. Before or when I caught up with the group. However, something wasn't right. There was no lift in sight, and the forest still surrounded us on all sides. I asked the girls sternly where the lift was, and they told me to stop worrying because it was close by. They then said they would take us there in a few minutes. As I was massaging my eyes, I heard a loud thump in the snow, and when I opened them, I saw that Riley was literally unconscious on his back in the snow. The girls laughed and called him a lightweight, but I knew it was more serious than that. I freaked out and hurried over to them, unclipping my skis. I thanked them for appearing to be breathing normally, but I was appalled. Jaden took a step toward the girls, asking them what the hell was going on. They seemed genuinely shocked, saying they had no idea what was wrong. If I followed them for a few minutes, I would be able to find them. However, that's when things got crazy. The forest gave way to a clearing, which I could see turned into a road. Looking back, I realized that we must have been on the other side of the ski mountain, which made sense. I stopped in my tracks at the edge of the woods, where the van's side opened, and four large-looking men stepped out to intercept the girls. The girls motioned for the guys to get back in the van, and one of them turned and pointed directly at me. I felt guilty for leaving my defenseless pals comatose in the woods, and I understood then that I was in too deep. I figured Jaden had had the least amount of alcohol, so I tried shaking him awake first. After a couple of handfuls of snow to the face, he was awake enough to talk, so I told him what had happened, still in shock. The guys in the van seemed to be arguing whether or not to leave or chase me, and I wasn't waiting another second. So I started limping back the way I came, knowing I'd be able to find my friends on the account of the tracks I left behind in the snow. Jaden and I reasoned that our only choice was to hope those men didn't choose to find us. However, they never arrived. I might not be telling the story because if they had, we waited for our friends to wake up for about an hour, and when they did, we told them everything. We had a ton of questions like, who were those other guys? Who were those girls? And what were they going to do to us? It was chilling to think about what might have happened if I hadn't been quick enough to pretend to drink. But even that would have been terrible. Something tells me that no one would go to such lengths just to rob some broke college edition. I suppose Amir and Ryland's expensive skis were worth stealing, but it still felt like overkill. An overkill ye would have known that we had expensive skis with us instead of renting things. It didn't make sense. Finding the car was terrible, reporting it to the police was terrible, and the drive home was terrible. The people running the mountains vowed to identify those involved, but we had to get back on the road and couldn't confirm that the police took it a little more seriously and told us we'd be updated should anything come up. It's been years, and they clearly never found anything, even though they gave us nothing online that described anything that was so effective so quickly, especially in a moderately small amount. Our best guess was that the substance was a combination of drugs, which makes sense given that all of my friends were feeling woozy after they woke up those girls, and whoever else was responsible for the entire situation were some sick people. I can only hope it was a simple, well-planned heist. Some. Beigist. Being out on the ice surrounded by the quiet stillness feels almost otherworldly. It's just one of those simple things we've always enjoyed, and even though it may sound strange, my friends Kyle, Ricky, and Kyle, Ricky, and I have and I have a little tradition of walking out onto this frozen lake a few towns over every winter. It's not some kind of grand event or anything. We just do it for fun. The Bow Fun. Snow reflects the sunshine. Benzamidine. Night, leaving you with a dream-like experience that is unrelated to anything else. That impression was intensified that night because the moon was also very full. Even though Ricky usually drove us around the lake, Kyle was driving that night. His pickup handled the snow fairly well, so we decided to be safe and let him drive. The lake itself is surrounded by a thin forest, so we couldn't actually drive all the way to the water's edge. I don't think the word forest is appropriate because it's really just a collection of sparsely spaced trees, but it's more than enough to keep a car from driving through. We parked in a nearby lot, got out of the car, and bundled up before walking toward the lake. Riccione? Icky said something, whispering that it was a bear as quietly as he could. My heart was already racing, so if it was a bear, the last thing we wanted to do was draw its attention. We stood there, frozen, not even daring to breathe too loudly, but as the figure got closer, something felt strange. Its gait wasn't quite right. It was too upright and too human, and it also appeared as though something was dragging behind it. It was one of the strangest things I've ever, and then it straightened up completely, and we realized that it wasn't a bear but rather a person wearing a bear suit. I turned, and as I touched my shoulder, saw him and Kyle heading back towards solid ground. I didn't say anything, so I followed suit, and the three of us made an effort to walk swiftly without creating too much noise. We barely noise. A few yards when a voice called out, "Hey!" from behind us. I didn't even turn around, I just started running, praying that the guy didn't have a gun. The cold didn't help, and after a brief pause, we made our way back to the car in silence. Kyle said it was probably someone dumping their trash, but I told him that was absurd. Kyle said that it was probably someone dumping their trash, but I didn't think he did. The reason I'm thinking about this now is because my mom was watching TV the other day, and an old missing persons report appeared on the screen. It was a child from our area, and the timeline of his disappearance matched up pretty closely with what we had seen on that lake. Ricky claimed the lake, as definitely someone dumping a body, but I told him the bag was way too small for that. The three of us discussed it the entire drive home, but we were unable to agree on a definitive explanation, so we never received a response. I'm not drawing conclusions too quickly. I realize it's unlikely and most likely simply a bad coincidence, but I can't help but wonder if those two things are connected in any way. By the time you hear this, we've most likely called the police to report our sighting. It feels imperative that we share what we saw, especially if it could help others understand the situation better. I just hope that by bringing this to light, we might find some clarity amidst the uncertainty. The thought of being able to prevent any potential danger gives me a sense of urgency. We owe it to ourselves and to the community to ensure that everyone stays safe and informed about what we experienced.